Hey everybody, I am back, and today I am talking about the same topics that I've been talking about lately, which is whether or not moral realism is true, also known as objective morality, whether or not we have free will, and also the problem of evil or the problem of suffering, as I would prefer to emphasize. And the main issue with that is that if there was a God that had all the omni properties that are normally attributed to God, that God is all powerful, all knowing, and all good, I think it's a problem that there's any evil or suffering in the world. I think it's difficult to explain why there would be any evil or suffering if such a being existed. As far as my stance on free will, we've been over this a few times on these lives, but basically what I think is that this term free will is used in all sorts of confused and misleading and mixed up ways that different people are referring to different sorts of things. Often some of the claims that they're making are obscure metaphysical claims that I don't think that there's good arguments or evidence to believe that they're true. They often rely on various types of a priori or armchair reasoning about what the world is like or what metaphysics is like, what the fundamental nature of reality is like, that sort of thing. That I don't really think that their proponents have good arguments for, because I think those arguments typically rely on armchair methods that I just don't buy into. And that, I mean, it's a whole discussion about why I don't buy into them. So people will claim that they have, sort of substantive a priori knowledge that one can acquire through the use of intuitions or intellectual seemings about what the world is like. And I don't think we have good reasons to think that people have those sorts of intuitive faculties. So that's another topic. But the main topic that I tend to talk about is moral realism. So I'm a moral anti-realist. So moral realism is this view that there are stance-independent moral facts, that there's facts about what's morally right or wrong, or good or bad, that are true independent of the goals, standards, or values of any individuals or groups. There's just facts about what's right or wrong, or good or bad, or whatever. And they're not made true by our preferences, by our standards, or our values, or cultural consensus, or some other procedure that ultimately turns on what people care about. They turn on something else, and then it just varies from one realist account to another what the moral facts depend on. But as long as it's not stances, it's some type of realism. So those are the three things that I tend to talk about. I sometimes talk about other stuff. People come up and they request, and we talk about other things if it comes up. So I'm happy to do that. I don't have any requests yet, and it's fine if you want to request. But I would prefer if people that request disagree about one of these things. So I'll say a bit about what I do. And I apologize for anybody that listens to me regularly, but other people, you never know. Oh, hey Jerome, what's up? So a lot of the standard sorts of stuff. So I'm a philosopher and psychologist. I have a PhD in psychology from Cornell. I have a master's in philosophy from Tufts. I do both. I do interdisciplinary work in metaethics, moral psychology, and experimental philosophy. Experimental philosophy is this really cool field where what experimental philosophers do is they employ typically the tools of the social sciences, but it could really, in principle, be any sort of empirical tools to explore questions about how people think about philosophy. And it could be, usually the focus is on how non-philosophers think, but you could look at how philosophers themselves think about things. And often the purpose of this type of research is to shed light on, quote unquote, philosophical questions. Now, personally, I see philosophy and science as continuous, and so I don't really think that there is any reason why we should say, there's philosophical questions over here and there's scientific questions over there. I see them as really one and the same as one another and entangled with one another. So, somebody says any day Lance's live is a good day. That's cool. Oh, and I should also say that I am going to be reviewing. So Peter Singer. People are probably familiar with Peter Singer, mostly for his work on animal ethics and that sort of thing. And he does a lot of work in applied ethics and that sort of stuff. So Peter Singer, some time ago, I don't know how it is, a few years ago now maybe, Peter Singer had been a moral anti-realist for a long time and then became a moral realist. And he's appeared in a couple of podcasts and that sort of thing to discuss his change from being an anti-realist to a realist. And I'm going to review a video version of one of these podcast episodes where he's on there to discuss that change. And I'm going to be reviewing and commenting on that. So it's something that I do on Mondays, which is, I call it Meta Monday. And I try to get a lot of the meta ethics on my YouTube channel done. So that's going to be over on YouTube at 4:30, I think. Let me check the time I have that scheduled. Is it 4 or 4:30? It's 4. Okay, so, okay. I just set it up and I got the time wrong. So in a little bit more than an hour. So I'm only going to have an hour on here, and then I'm going to pop over to there. And so you can join me over on YouTube there and, subscribe to the channel and all that stuff. And I'll be reviewing that video. It's probably going to take too long for me to review it in one session because I tend to, every 5 minutes of commentary, I give like a half hour of getting angry about something somebody said. Peter Singer doesn't make me angry, though, on the topic of metaethics. I just disagree with his stance. And so I've already watched this particular video. I think I might not have finished the last 10 or 15 minutes of it, but I've watched most of it, so it's not going to be like a candid reaction. It's going to be my thoughts. I already watched it. I've had time to digest some of what he says. It's going to be doing that. All right. So let's see in the comments, people commenting in the comments. So again, if you disagree with me about moral realism, free will, or problem of evil, you can request. But for now, I'm going to look at the comments. Why would there be no suffering? I don't care. I don't know what you mean there. All morals are objective. Well, if you disagree, you're welcome to explain in the chat. You can come up, you can request if you want to talk about why you think morality is subjective. I will say that on this TikTok, I am not interested in people being. I'm not saying anybody here is, but if I don't like rude stuff or people yelling at each other or talking over each other. It's not my thing. A lot of people like that sort of blood sport type of discussion. It is absolutely not my thing. That does not mean that I'm all about being peaceful and friendly to everybody. I do think that there's nothing wrong with a bit of rough disputing, when the situation calls for it. It's just a lot of people, I think, can just be rude. So don't be rude on my channel. You're here or YouTube or anywhere. I'm just not going to talk to you if you do that. If you want to do that, go do it somewhere else. So Jerome says, I didn't realize that he changed his views on moral realism. He did. He became a moral realist. Last one is debatable. God would want to eliminate suffering, and I see no evidence of such. Yeah, I think God would eliminate suffering if there was a God that was all good, all-knowing, and all-powerful. And so the fact that there is suffering is, I think, a challenge to the existence of such a God. So I don't know why people do this. So somebody in the comment mentions, the same sorts of activities that and actions that people always mention when they bring this stuff up. That people always reach for like really horrific and awful moral things. I don't know why people think that that's a good way of prompting realist intuitions to entangle our personal outrage, disgust, and repugnance at certain sorts of actions. Like why inject that into the scenario if the goal is to evaluate abstract philosophical considerations in a sober way. I talk a lot on, and I see a couple requests, so I'll take them up, but I'll mention this just because I think it's important. So I have a big problem with what I call normative entanglement, and this is when people conflate normative and metaethical considerations, and they make it seem like if you're an anti-realist, that if you don't share the realist's metaethical views, that you don't share the realist's normative views or attitude towards moral issues. So someone might say, hey, do you think this really bad thing is objectively wrong? And if you say no, they're like, oh my God, you're a horrible, awful, evil, stupid person. And really what's going on is they're asking two questions at once. Do you think it's wrong? And insofar as it's wrong, is it objectively wrong? And they want you to just say yes or no to both of those at the same time. And the problem is, if you say yes to both, that's no problem. But now, it looks like you're a realist. If you say no, it sounds like you're saying no to both. So you don't think it's objectively wrong and you don't think it's wrong at all. And so when you bundle metaethical and normative claims together, you can give the impression that an anti-realist is some sort of evil, stupid idiot with monstrous views. And people do this all the time. And I've pointed out over and over and over, even professional philosophers employ normative entanglement. It's everywhere. Everyone should point it out when people do it. And you should tell people, hey, it's not okay to do that. It's not okay to ask what is really a kind of loaded question where you're embedding two questions in one another. Just to give you an example, imagine if I went around saying, hey, do you think that 2 + 2 = 4 and that the earth is flat, yes or no? And what are you supposed to say to that? Yes? Oh, so you think the earth is flat? Well, then you're stupid. Oh, no? Oh, so you don't think 2 + 2 = 4? Oh, well, then you're stupid. Both is, you can't just stick a conjunct together and then say, I want a yes or no to the whole thing, because it could give the false impression that if you agree to part of it, you agree to all of it. So just don't ask questions like that. But people do it, and they get away with it because people don't call out these sorts of tricky questions. So if you do come up on the channel to talk to me about that and you use a normative entanglement, I am going to call attention to it. Alrighty.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. What you want to talk about?
Well, I was just going to try to hit your bullet points, but I'm not going to do things that you exhaustingly just described.
Fair enough.
Um, You're absolutely true. There is no one that could disagree with you in saying that there is no objective moral truth, because that is true. That is all based on that is all based on cultural differences and history. Um,
Okay.
I wanna hit the second one. I mean, if you agree, or if, I agree with you that there's no objective moral truth because it's based on other people's beliefs in a cumulative kind of way.
Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but if it's a point of agreement on the claim itself, I don't want to
Well,
say too much about my own views because I'll end up just monologuing for too long. So I'd rather focus on what we might disagree
there
about.
is subjective truth, but there's no objective moral truth. You're right, because objective is not a word that should be put into people's opinions, because objective would never fit into any of that. It would never will. Objective is based on a scientific basis of hypothesis results.
Okay.
Subjective is opinion based. Like it, I'm an audio engineer, so for example, like if I think I'm done with the song and I think it sounds great, I think I'm done with it. It's still my subjective truth. If the band calls me back and says that, oh, we don't like it, you need to change this, this, and that, that's still their subjective opinion. It's not an objective truth is that the sun shines every day. A
Okay.
subjective truth is that, I like the last thing that Lady Gaga came out with or whatever. It doesn't matter. Uh,
Gotcha.
so we don't have free will is the next one, right?
Yes.
So what, if I may ask you, because I'm fairly new to this live, why don't you think that you have free will?
So I think the issue is that when people employ that term, they use it in such a wide variety of ways that it's just not clear what it even means to say that we do or we don't have free will. In any given instance in which a person says we do have free will or we don't have free will, I think that the first question to ask is, well, what do you mean by free will? And when I'm saying we don't have free will, a large part of what I'm focused on is rejecting the way that philosophers talk about this topic. And the way that philosophers talk about the topic is they think of free will, and at least in the contemporary discourse on free will, they describe free will as the set of capacities with respect to human agency that are a necessary condition for basic desert moral responsibility. And that it's like a technical definition. And I think that that whole way
Sure,
of
it's also
characterizing
the
free will is
Wikipedia
very
definition.
confused.
Can you be more? Can you be more specific? Can you name a couple of philosophers and different? Because Kierkegaard has a different feeling as opposed to Saint Thomas Aquinas.
Right. And so this is about the contemporary literature. So the philosophers that would construe things in this way would be people like Greg Caruso, Dirk Perboom.
Oh, contemporary? You mean like within the last 60 years?
I mean, they're right now they're writing about this stuff. Like papers are coming out right now.
Oh, okay. It's very much contemporary. Okay, I
Yeah,
understand. Okay, thank you. I've never read any of this stuff, so I'm not privy to it.
that's fair.
Uh,
Yeah, and it's a sort of it's very 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 downstream of the specific way that modern analytic philosophers have ended up framing things, and so it's not going to be free will. There's going to be a lot of different construals in like continental philosophy and early Western philosophy that's sort of pre linguistic turn. So you're going to have a sort of history of discussion about free will that I'm barely addressing when saying that I don't think free will exists.
but on this footnote, like I could hang up, or I could keep talking, or I could, you know, finish the beer I have in my hand, or I could, let my dog out, or I could beat the dog, or I could beat him to death. None of those things I'm going to do, but I'm just trying to figure out what your example is if we don't have free will. Like I have
Sure.
plenty of choices I can make ahead of me right now.
Yeah,
But
just as an aside, be careful about some of the language. So, like
yes,
TikTok
sir.
is not going to be okay with certain terminology. No, it's fair, it's fair. Just avoid that terminology,
Of
like
course.
say unaliving, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Right. So, philosophers have in mind this connection between our agency and then holding people accountable. So when people like if a person intentionally plans out plots to unalive somebody on purpose to like get their money or something.
Mm-hmm.
That is a situation, and then we should assume the person's like not on drugs, they're not being coerced, they're not delusional, they're not out of their mind. They're knowingly planning this out, aware of the repercussions, and they
For
can
lack
reason
of a
through
better term,
alternatives.
of their own free will.
Something like that, yes. But then you could have a person that is coerced into getting money out of the ATM because a person is pointing a weapon at them and saying, "Give me all your money, and I'm going to go use it to do bad things." Well, in that case, the person is coerced into doing it, and so they did not get the money out of the ATM and fund these terrible activities of their own accord. They were coerced into doing it, and so philosophers look at these situations and they say, "Look, something is going on with people psychologically in these situations. Something about the situations differ such that we would hold people accountable in the first case and not in the second case." And that's what we're going to call free will. So free will is connected to features of human agency that we would consider appropriate conditions for holding people accountable for their actions. That's what the current literature focuses on.
Sure, but you're just describing people being taken advantage of.
Well, that's one way in which a person might not have free will. A person might also not have free will if they lack the psychological capacity to reason through alternatives. So like a baby or something might not have, or an animal doesn't have free will.
If people are stupid enough to believe it, then it's not their fault. In a general kind of way?
It's going to vary from one account of free will to another. What conditions precisely are constitutive of the distinction between when we do and don't have free will.
Is your argument that people don't have free will because other people can contort it?
No. So my specific concern is that I just don't think that there's any fact of the matter about whether people are or are not morally responsible in the basic desert sense that philosophers care about in some deep and defensible way. And so I actually come at the issue of free will from the other angle. It's not so much that I don't think people can make choices that are uncoerced or are consistent with their goals and values. I think, yeah, sure, people make choices. I just don't think that people can or could make choices in a way where they could even in principle be subject to basic desert, because I think that idea is itself a conceptual confusion and is just a bunch of nonsense, basically.
I appreciate your use of terms, but I don't know if it's really helping you at this point. It's a lot of words, and I understand them all, but I don't know if it's really serving your benefit.
Well, I do my best.
No, I mean, you could describe those things without saying certain. It's fine. I'm good. I'm just trying to get to the root of the point right here is that I just want you to tell me why people don't have free will. Right? And if you're saying that some people do have free will and some people don't, then maybe change your bullet point.
That's not what I'm saying. It would be that people might have free will under some construals of what that term means, and they wouldn't under other construals of what that term means.
Well, so your bullet point says we don't have free will. So describe that to me.
I think I already did. So part of the issue is that I'm rejecting
you're doing it conditionally. You're doing it.
Yeah. Well, I conditionally reject everything. So, like, if I have on here on the bullet points if God existed, but it's going to whether or not God exists is going to turn on what you mean by God. Same thing for objective moral truth. I think all terms and concepts are like this. They're all conditional. Our meanings behind any of these terms can be flexible.
Without trying to be offensive or anything like that, I think that you're finding concepts and words to be more attractive than the actual objective truth to what they're going at. I feel like you're using a lot of words that, I mean, I understand, but still, like I said, you're using a lot of these words to make it sound like it's bigger than it is. When I just want you to tell me, like, why we don't have free will.
I think I already answered your question.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the third one then.
Sure.
That's okay. If God existed, then there would be little or no suffering. Okay. I can assess this many different ways, but I'll take this one. Are you a... Well, I don't have to make it personal, but are you a parent?
No.
Do you have brothers or sisters that are parents?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. I don't need to know anymore. So then, if somebody that you know has a child that's doing something bad, and they are always going to be told that that's a bad thing to do. They're eventually going to try to do it. They might be wrong in trying to do it, but look, I'm having a hard time describing this right now, but what I'm basically
Mhm.
trying to say is that if you as a parent did every single thing for your child that they ever needed done, then when they're an adult, they wouldn't be able to do anything.
Mhm.
So if God existed and you're saying there would be little or no suffering, then it just seems a little self-serving, because uh, if if God does exist, and I'm not sure, but if he does exist and he has a bunch of children out there running around, why would he intervene in all kinds of weird decisions that they make? Like, why would he do that? Like, they're adults or they're children or whatever. It doesn't even matter at that point. It's metaphysical at that point. Like, of course, if there was no suffering in the world, then there would also be no contention. There would also be no entertainment. Everyone would be bored and dead.
Why would everyone be bored and dead if there was no suffering?
Okay, that's a hard one to explain, but that's not exactly what I meant.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that, look, if you're a parent and you have 14 kids and they all seem like they're going to do okay, why would you be concerned about the small things that they do on their everyday life? That's where suffering comes in, because if God does exist, then he would also want people to know that suffering does exist, and they don't have to do it just with him. They have to figure it out for themselves. You have to be able to figure it out for yourselves. Wouldn't any good parent want someone to figure out something for themselves?
Uh, I mean, overall, but I wouldn't want someone to figure out what it's like. I wouldn't want my children to find out what it's like to be eaten by sharks. But apparently, God's okay with that because at least some children have been literally eaten by sharks. That doesn't sound like something a good parent would allow to happen.
True.
And so, in extremis, like if we're talking about more severe cases of suffering, um, you know, children are unalived as a result of leukemia and war and kidnapping and all sorts of horrific things. At the very least, one would think that if there were a benevolent God that had the power to do so, that they would stop that. But if there were a God, they're not even stopping those sorts of things. But even minor types of suffering, as a parent, I certainly think that a parent should not, like the movie Bubble Boy or something, prohibit their children from doing anything that's even remotely possibly of any potential threat to them. But that's precisely because there's instrumental value in children learning, don't touch a hot stove. And, if you're rude to other people or you're rude and mean to an animal, you could get bit, you could get hurt. People will not like you. There's consequences for your actions. So, for a parent to try to protect their children at all costs to the point that they undermine their child's quality of life, that's obviously bad. But it's bad in a way where it's conditional in the fact that the parent has two choices in these cases: prevent or don't prevent. And prevention of harm in all cases leads to a worse outcome than prevention in only some cases, but not all cases. But that whole scenario is one that parents have no voluntary control over. They don't get to choose all those outcomes. Those outcomes are foisted upon them because of how the world is. If a parent could set up conditions in which the children could grow up and flourish and be, optimally happy without any suffering involved, I would hope parents would choose that. And the thing is, God doesn't stand in relation to humans the way parents stand in relation to their children. God has, on this standard characterization of all powerful, all knowing, and all good, God has unlimited power. God could make things any way he wants. He doesn't have to make the situation one where suffering is needed to learn lessons. God could allow people to and could set up God could set up a situation where we learn lessons without the suffering. So God has apparently
Can you give an
chosen to create
example of
circumstances.
the lesson without suffering?
Sure. So the world in which we're in, people learn things through interacting and engaging with a specific kind of world, a world that bites back, so to speak. But there's no logical reason why God couldn't create the humans with some different type of agency and different style of learning and a world that's very different from this one. God could create a world with no tornadoes, no earthquakes, no paper cuts, and people could still learn and grow and live good lives without any of those bad things happening. And it's not at all clear why
A lot
There
of
would be a
people would
logical
argue that
problem with
he
God doing
did
it.
do that, and then we kind of messed it up.
Well, yeah, when you say we, then that brings in collective,
Well,
responsibility.
people
So even if Adam and Eve did things that would warrant punishing them,
don't.
I didn't. And so punishing me because what Adam and Eve did would itself strike me as something that would be wrong and something that one would want to
Well, it's
prevent.
ridiculous, and that's just a story from 2,000 years ago that's not applicable to right now.
Right? Yeah.
But just because, like, I was just trying to give the example that, like you said, if God exists, there would be little or no suffering. But
Mm-hmm.
that's almost goes in line with saying that, like, if my parents were good, then I wouldn't have a little or no suffering. I'm just dumbing it down to a parent-child relationship, and so everybody knows that the relationship between a child or parent, whether good or bad, isn't necessarily optimal at all times. So if God does exist, wouldn't he also be fallible to the same kind of constructs that someone built for them?
Not really. I don't see why. God has a different set of powers and responsibilities than parents do, presumably.
So, like, if God created the Earth and like puts you down on a rainforest of like everything you'd ever need forever, you don't think there'd be any conflict? There would be any?
I mean, you're giving me a hypothetical where that's underdescribed, and we could just stipulate. So God could create. We could stipulate God could create a world where there's no conflict. I think that'd be better than a world with conflict. I mean, unless you think conflict is good.
I don't think conflict is good. I think conflict is necessary for growth.
Why is growth necessary?
No, because then you wouldn't have this phone or this internet or
God could just create phones and internet.
well, that seems ridiculous, but okay.
What? Why is it ridiculous?
Because because we were here, we were the ones that put tiny rocks together and soldered them together and made circuits. God did not do that. We did that.
Right, but what I'm saying is God could do that if God is all powerful. That's just a logical entailment of being all powerful.
Yeah, but if you're have 13 kids and 3 of them are in trouble, what are you going to do about it then? You're going to take care of all of them all at once and make yourself go broke and bankrupt?
Well, if you're God, you wouldn't feel broken bankrupt. You're all powerful.
Right. I mean, your argument is mute because you're dealing with the hypothetical omnipotent.
Mm-hmm.
You have to if we're gonna have a real discussion about what God would say or do, then you're gonna have to push him out of the human aspect of it. You're gonna have to push him out of judgment or characteristics of judging anybody.
Well, characteristics of judging people. If God is supposed to be all good, presumably that influences how God acts and treats people. So, what I'm trying to convey here, on my view, is that if a being has a cluster of particular properties, if they're all good, all knowing, and all powerful, then what I think an entailment of that is that whatever happens is something that they're aware of, that they have the power to prevent if they want to, and that they themselves, I mean, if God really is, omnipotent and omnibenevolent and omniscient, then everything that happens is under God's power. God is in control of all events that occur. And so if that's the case, I think that everything would happen because God wants it to happen. And so if, a child is unalive from leukemia, God must want that to happen. And that doesn't seem consistent with that God being all good. And so you have a problem there, which is that if suffering occurs, and suffering it's not logically necessary that such suffering occurs, there shouldn't be any reason why a being that supposedly has all these properties would allow for it to occur in the first place. So it seems to me that there's an inconsistency between even a single child suffering horribly and there being a being with these properties.
Yeah, there's a lot of inconsistencies for sure.
And that's all I'm really getting at.
No, I wanted to say for a second, it kind of goes back to the free will thing, and just for a second, because like you said, if God was able to do anything that he wanted to, good or bad, and just decided to let bad happen, then
Yeah.
I'm not too biblically knowledgeable, but I know at one point that free will comes into thing because God wanted to give people. Okay, so that's what. Okay, now I know what I'm talking about. That's where the story of Adam and Eve comes into the thing, which I don't
Hmm.
believe in, by the way. But it's fine. I'll take that as. Um, so basically, in a weird way, that was the story of Christianity. Was they give a weird story about two people that didn't do what he said to do, so now they have free will.
Yeah.
And so now that they have free will, we're going to let them do whatever they want. If they want to be
Yeah.
closer to me, they can be. If they don't want to, you know what? That's their fucking problem. I mean, that's their problem. Excuse me. Sorry.
That's fine. Yeah, well, I'm not seeing substantive. Maybe we disagree on some of the ways I've framed or structured some of my remarks here,
Sure.
and
Fine.
part of that is a restriction from I can't write a whole paragraph clarifying everything I mean on here, or it wouldn't be readable. But I do want to move on. There were a couple guests that requests that seem to have left, so I want to see if I could move on and talk to some other people before I have to go because I only have about another 30 minutes, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
All right. So thanks so much for joining me here. I just want to have, at least bring up another person. I don't want to, if I talk to you the whole time, people are going to be like, ah. So do feel free to request again. Talk to you another time. All right. Well, I'm giving you an opportunity to say something, but I'm not hearing anything. I'll give you a follow up
Okay.
too. Alrighty.
I didn't know you wanted me to say something.
Oh, okay. Yeah. If you want to, I'm just saying goodbye.
Okay. Well,
Alrighty.
I didn't know you really wanted to give me a. You want to give me a last thing to say or no?
Sure. If you got something to say.
I don't know if God exists. I think
It looks like you're muted.
really tell everybody that somebody was calling me. I'm sorry.
Okay. No problem. Well, I'll move on to the next guest then. Just do feel free to request again sometime. All right. Take care. Alrighty. We have got Semantic. How's it going?
I hope you're having a blessed day.
Sorry?
I hope you're having a blessed day, sir.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. How's it going?
Miraculous.
All right. What do you want to talk about?
I wanted to talk about substance dualism, universal mind theory, or egg theory.
Whoa. Okay. Pick something. Tell me what you want to talk about.
I want to talk about your belief system on substance dualism and all of us sharing the one substance, which is going to be the mind, which is the awareness of being.
Whoa. Okay. All right. Well, you could, if you want to develop on that a bit more, or if you want to ask me questions, I'm happy to try to field some questions because I don't even know where to take that topic.
Are you a property dualist or a substance dualist or a different? Do you accept dualism?
I'm not a dualist. So I'm a pragmatist, and I tend to be pretty cautious about committing myself to any substantive metaphysical claims at all of any kind.
Okay, that's dope. Do you hold to like empiricism?
Yeah, I would definitely call myself an empiricist, but I would not call myself a physicalist or a materialist or a naturalist.
Why not?
I think that all of those terms are poorly defined in such a way that on some construals, I think that they make substantive metaphysical claims that proponents of those views can't support. So if someone says like everything is physical, like I'm going to have a question, which is, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to say it is physical? What are physical things? And I don't think that proponents of physicalism really have a very good answer to that question. So, they might say something like, well, physical things are the things that are described by physics. Well, that's a moving target, and it still doesn't tell me what they are, because I'm perfectly happy to take a scientifically anti-realist view of physics and view it in instrumental terms where I understand physics to be useful for making predictions and our models are provisional. So, that doesn't really tell me what things fundamentally are. And I'm very skeptical that there's even a fact of the matter about whether things fundamentally are anything in particular. So I think physics tells us what stuff does. I don't think it tells us what stuff is. So I'm going to be very wary of any account which I think has sort of undischarged explanatory components that are just they remain mysterious, and I think physicalism sticks you with that.
Do you think that math aligns with that? Do you think math is like subjective or objective?
Yeah, so I would be something closer to a nominalist about math. So I'm not a mathematical Platonist. I would say I'm closer to viewing mathematics as something that's constructed rather than discovered.
Okay, so you don't think that math exists mind independently?
No.
Quantity doesn't exist mind independently?
It would be really, it's really going to depend what you mean on that, but the sort of blunt answer is no, I don't.
Okay, fair enough. And then your position on consciousness is?
So I call myself a qualia quietist. It's most closely related to illusionism about consciousness. I don't think that phenomenal consciousness exists, but I also don't think that it seems that it exists to most people.
I'm sorry, one more time. Do you think that it doesn't exist to most people or that it does?
I do not think phenomenal consciousness exists, and I also don't think that it seems to most people that phenomenal consciousness exists. I think it's largely a philosophical invention, the notion that there's phenomenal consciousness.
How do you think that most people are going through the world if they're not aware that they are, and I'm just going to use this term loosely, a free being?
It's really going to depend on what you mean by that. Like if someone says, hey, do you think of yourself as a free being that's conscious? I would say yes. But what I mean by consciousness and free will is very different from what a lot of academic philosophers mean by those terms. And so in all of these cases, I try to be very careful about language so as not to give the impression that I'm endorsing metaphysical background assumptions behind free will or consciousness that I don't endorse.
So would you say this consciousness is just like a conglomerance of like brain activity?
Something like that. I would favor some sort of functionalist view. And so I wouldn't say consciousness is reducible to brain states. I take a much more of a view that consciousness is better understood as a description of various sorts of processes. And those processes, among other things, wouldn't be reducible to specific physical their specific physical constituent parts. So I think like a machine could be conscious. I think an alien with a very different biology from humans could be conscious. It's not like consciousness requires a specific brain configuration. I think it's more like software than it is hardware.
Are you using consciousness as self-awareness or a reaction to stimuli?
Neither of those. I use consciousness to refer to a sort of cluster of properties and characteristics. I don't really like any of this terminology, but basically, like humans do stuff like talk about themselves as persistent entities over time. They organize various types of sensory information and can comment on it in a roughly integrated way. So there's various sorts of cognitive processes that humans are capable of that I think generally fall within the scope of what we're talking about when we talk about consciousness. But I don't think that there's some unified essence. So I really, in a certain sense, I don't really think consciousness is a thing. It'd be more like if we were talking about 17 different things and then we're just saying that's consciousness. And I actually think it fragments and breaks down, and that some animals might have some of these characteristics and not others, and some aliens could have some of these and not others. And so I think that there's a problem when talking about consciousness, so a parallel that you might see among functionalists and eliminativists and people that take similar sort of, I guess you could say, empiricist views like me, would be something like life. Like, I don't think that there's any fundamental essence distinguishing living from non-living things. I think that the notion of a living thing breaks down into a cluster of characteristics that living things tend to have that non-living things don't have, like maintaining homeostasis, reproduction, that sort of thing. And I think consciousness is like that.
I use consciousness, let me know where you disagree, as a reaction to stimuli, and then having categorical distinctions between cellular and non-cellular life.
Cellular and non-cellular life for consciousness?
Well, no. So a reaction to stimuli is consciousness, and then the categorical distinctions would be between cellular and non-cellular things. So I would say that a tornado and a house interacting with each other are experiencing non-cellular consciousness.
Non-cellular consciousness? What is that?
A reaction to stimuli between two things that don't have cellular life.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not. When I say consciousness, I'm not talking about like self-awareness or qualia.
Okay.
It's more about what does it mean for something to possess or have or experience awareness.
Gotcha. Huh, that's a very different conception of consciousness than I have. I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you agree that the reaction to stimuli is necessary for something to experience consciousness, or no?
I don't know how to answer that question. A reaction to stimuli.
Yeah, anything that possesses a reaction to stimuli is experiencing a spectrum of consciousness.
I wouldn't say that, especially if you're including things like tornadoes.
Even though I'm not talking about self-awareness. Like
we're using terms in a way that are so different that it would take, I think, a longer discussion to bridge the divide on this sort of thing. Like, if we set aside the term consciousness, could you just tell me what it is you're proposing?
Awareness.
Like what do you mean by awareness?
A reaction to stimuli.
And what? I'm sorry to keep asking, but what are reactions to stimuli?
A cause and effect.
Okay, so if you're using it that broadly, then I mean, this seems like, to me, it would encompass almost everything. I mean, if a rock bumps into another rock, would you consider that a reaction to stimuli?
Yes.
Okay, so things causally interact with one another. I certainly agree with that. What do we do with that? So, I think that there are causal relations between things.
We have a symmetry breaker between self-awareness and awareness itself, and then we have another symmetry breaker between cellular and non-cellular life reacting to stimuli.
Okay, can you? This is all new to me. So could you just tell me more about this and develop on this a bit? I'm not even sure what to ask, to be honest.
Well, the problem of consciousness has been like an obsession of mine for like the last year. And so I just ask questions about it, and I try to talk to people smarter than myself, which is basically everybody, especially you. And then my goal is to find like truth propositions in everything. And so because I can't solve the problem of consciousness, it's more of like, what is the most reasonable position to like ground this experience that we all appear to be sharing?
Mm-hmm.
And so like, it appears to me that I'm dualistic by nature. It appears to me that I'm in control of this. It appears to me that I am not the thoughts, but I am perceiving the thoughts.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So like, there's like this internal battle between like me just accepting that I am just the respondents of physical properties. When I'll just say clearly, even though it might not be very clear. It might be
right. Gotcha.
That my nature is dualistic, and so trying to combat this illusion has been really challenging.
So when you say dualistic, sorry if I missed something that you may have already said, but is this like substance dualism?
Yeah, just like for this conversation, egg theory, universal mind theory. Yeah, this is going to hold to like substance dualism.
So, well, I'm not familiar with those. Do you want to tell me a bit more about those? I mean, I'm happy just to learn from you about your perspective on this, because I'm not going to argue with you, because there's like, why am I going to disagree if I don't even know what the view is? So I just have to hear more about it.
Yeah, I would just use the mind and the spirit interchangeably, and that we all have one mind or spirit.
Okay. So when you say we all have one mind, you don't mean each of us individually has a mind, but we're all one mind?
Yeah, we're all like the sensation of like awareness of being.
Okay.
So like, I presuppose that you are aware that you are being.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would say I'm aware that I'm a being.
And then I take this beyond physical brain states, because I think we agree, but correct me if I'm wrong. It's not about specific properties within a brain state that says like, okay, well, you meet this criteria of 4 brain states, or you have 4 specific properties in your brain, therefore you're self-aware now.
Yeah.
So from here, it's like, okay, so I want to be like, I just want to like analyze the possibility that the things around me are also self-aware beyond, or because if I don't hold to this, man, then I'm just essentially locked into believing that everything is just a chain of uncontrollable reactions to stimuli, and that compatibilism is just like accepting the illusion. Do you hold that you're like me and you are controlling any of the words that are coming out of our mouth right now, or are we just reacting to stimuli?
I think people are in control of their actions
How are they
most of the
controlling?
time. How, like, if you're asking for like a causal explanation, it's going to vary from one person to another. But I like people are able to process information. They have goals and values. They think about their goals and values and what sort of facts are presented to them, and then they make a judgment, or they deliberate on the basis of that information, and they make a decision. So that's the kind of control that I think people usually have over their actions, where they're able to consider a range of alternatives, select from them, and then in practice, they often practically have the ability to act on those goals and interests. So, for instance, if a person is like walking through the forest and they hit a fork in the trail and they could turn left or right, they could think about which way they want to go and then go that way. And so that's the kind of control I think people have.
When you say they, are you saying the brain?
No, I wouldn't. I don't just think of people as brains.
So when you say they, like let's say I'm in the forest, right? And I come across 3 different paths. If I hold to just physicalism, right?
Yeah.
Well, then I'm just determined to choose based around what my brain processes as the greatest preference, right? And me choosing is just an illusion.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is I tend to be inclined towards being a determinist. So, like, I would assume that all of our choices are determined. I don't know that that's definitely true. Maybe determinism's wrong. I don't know. But I operate under the assumption that it is. So I would say that all of those choices I've described, all that control is determined. So if that makes me some type of compatibilist, then I guess I'm some type of compatibilist.
I just don't know how you're cashing out control in this context.
So
can you control what is determined?
I think so, yeah.
How?
I don't see what the incompatibility is. So we would just need to cash out what's meant by control. And in the sorts of cases I'm describing, it would be something roughly like the ability to select from among alternatives that course of action that is most consistent with one's goals and to act accordingly. And people just can do that, and they do that. So that nothing about that characterization that we're choosing an alternative, that we're choosing one option rather than another, that fact about our choices determined by antecedent causes is consistent with us making choices on that control of what a choice is. So you could dispute that that's like an actual choice. Like maybe you think that's a bad control of the notion of a choice, and that would be fine. So I would say that we don't have the ability to choose if what one means by a choice is a decision that is not determined. That's fine. Then we can't make choices of that kind. That's why I'm so cautious about language. We just have to be careful about what we mean by the words we're using.
Language is crazy, bro. It's insane.
So we might even agree. Like, so here, the weird thing about philosophical disagreements is we could agree on what the world is like, but because we're using terms differently, where the disputes end up just being, verbal disputes. And I think so much of philosophy is just a bunch of verbal disputes, and that makes a lot of it really trivial and frustrating.
Yeah, that's why I'm the semantic shark now, and I try my best genuinely to use semantics to make a conversation productive and fruitful, and I hope that I've done that in this conversation.
Well, I feel like because I'm leaving in about 15 minutes that we would have to have a longer conversation to dig into how we're using some of the language, and I think that would put us on a better playing field for having productive discussions.
Yeah, I think that, in my opinion, this has been a productive conversation. If you want to get somebody else up for the last 15 minutes, and if you ever want to talk again, please, it's a privilege speaking with you. I appreciate this, and yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, so I will talk to you another time. Appreciate it.
Bless.
Yep, take care. Alrighty, there was a request, but I'm not seeing it now. Yeah, it's gone. There was a request like a minute ago. Okay, so that was interesting. I do like when, I'm not so tyrannical that I got to stick to the topics that are on here. So if someone comes up and they want to talk about consciousness or something else, that's totally cool. I should probably put something up here about consciousness. So, I do have a request. Okay, so I will take one more request, and that's going to be it. So no more requests after this, and I will be out of here in maybe about 10 or 15 minutes.
Hello.
How's it going?
Guys, doing well. So, I guess I've got a few questions. So,
Yep.
one, is gonna. I guess you brought consciousness. That is an interesting line. So, do you think when people talk about the problem of consciousness, that there's a huge misunderstanding of like how much we don't know about consciousness, or do you think there's much more to consciousness that we don't know of? Like for example, causation.
Oh yeah, I think there's a lot we don't know. I don't think so. There's a whole bunch of empirical research that's been getting done in the past few years, and I haven't delved into that in a very long time. And so it's possible some of these scientific models of this or that aspect of consciousness out there are shedding some real insight that I'm just not aware of. But even then, I suspect that we're pretty far from having really, really deep and substantive knowledge of consciousness. So there's people like Anil Seth and other people that seem to be doing really interesting and valuable work on consciousness. But unfortunately, I just haven't been focusing on that. So I don't know what progress has been made on that question.
I guess more to delve into that question more is like, do you think that we're anywhere close to understanding the causation of consciousness?
I don't know. I'm just not familiar enough with that type of research. One thing I would say about a lot of this research is that some of it may be premature because it's very hard to say what causes consciousness if we don't have a clear conception of what it is we're talking about, like what is consciousness, such that we could discuss what causes it. Because in any instance in which you're saying what causes this to occur, you need a good account of what this is. And in the case of consciousness, it has this weird Necker cube-like quality where it's simultaneously the sort of thing that we're inclined to say is the most familiar thing. It's obvious what it is. So why on earth would we need a clear conception before we start talking about what causes it? And at the same time, it's also one of the most impenetrable, weird, and mysterious things. So I don't know if a lot of these accounts have a good account of what it is they're even measuring in the first place.
So, like, do you also have credence towards the idea of it being material or immaterial?
Well, I don't typically endorse the material-immaterial distinction. I'm an empiricist. I think that the way in which it's the best way to go about acquiring knowledge is ultimately built on top of the deployment of our sensory systems. But nothing about the use of empirical data lends me to think that we have to construe things in terms of things being material or immaterial. There's empirically there are good ways of acquiring empirical information and there's worse ways. And to me, if you're going to say by immaterial you just mean a thing that we couldn't know about through empirical terms, then I'm not going to think that things are immaterial. And I'm also not going to think we're going to know about them. But if someone says, but by immaterial things, I do mean things you could in principle study empirically, then I'm okay with that. So I'm about empiricism, not materialism.
Yeah, that's fine. But what I meant was in terms of immaterial, is just like in the notion of non-physical, at least not natural. But that's like a bigger question.
Yeah, so I don't subscribe to the whole natural, non-natural divide either. I think a lot of these philosophical divides are well-meaning and may have served a purpose when they originally arose, but I'm not sure what purposes they serve anymore. Because a lot of these distinctions, it's not just that they're hard to pin down, it's that I don't think there's anything to pin down.
Well, I think the only reason they do that is I think the main reason why it happens is due to the God conversation. I think that often, if there's a huge distinction between the material world, nature, and something unnatural, supernatural, then I think it often delves into the topic of like things like souls, consciousness, and what.
Yeah, a lot of people want to bracket off parts of conversation that they are not prepared to discuss or they don't think it's fruitful to discuss, and they might use a term to say, I'm going to create a wall here, or a box. I'm going to create a box, and I'm going to put all the stuff I don't want to talk about in that box, and that's fine. You could do that, but I don't know that that sort of distinctions that we created to narrow the focus of our conversation towards a path we want to focus on really pick out, like they don't carve nature at its joints. They're not telling us what reality is like. They're telling us something more about ourselves. And so I think I tend to think of the natural non-natural distinction in terms of epistemological differences and social differences and the sorts of things people are comfortable discussing, not so much in terms of any genuine, like them genuinely capturing some deep metaphysical difference.
Okay. And another question is, in terms of natural law theory, thoughts on Thomas Aquinas, things like that?
I don't understand it well enough to have substantive thoughts on that.
Oh, really? Because I know you talk about objective morality a lot. But And I know a lot of people propose a natural law to be objective.
Yeah. So where I place myself in the whole realist anti-realist divide is very much in a sort of post G.E. Moore framework, which is very much like Principia Ethica, like 1902, I think. And the modern discussion in analytic metaethics arose in the past 120 or so years. And most of what I'm familiar with are the disputes that have emerged within that context. So you had in the sort of heyday of contemporary metaethics, non-cognitivism, or these days expressivism, was all the rage. You had emotivism with Ayer, and then you had a universal prescriptivism with R.M. Hare. And those seem to give way under the weight of dissatisfaction with anti-realist accounts. And I think that there might have been a more general resurgence eventually in, basically logical positivism receded and became less popular. And you had this resurgence of both naturalist but more expansive conceptions of the world, and eventually the non-naturalist conceptions too arose. And so you had this sort of two waves of contemporary realism. First you had Railton and some others, I think Boyd and a few others, of naturalist realist accounts, and then you had the non-naturalist accounts emerge shortly thereafter. So maybe the first was more in the 80s, the second more in the 90s with Russ Schaefer Landau, and now these days Mike Humer, Terence Cuneo, and some other people. And so those are the ones I'm mostly dealing with. So these are contemporary secular realist accounts, and that's mostly where I position myself in opposition. And I'm a lot less familiar with the sort of teleological accounts and the sort of early accounts that people have employed, and in some cases reincorporated into contemporary analytic philosophy. In terms of like modern, there's like this happened in normative ethics too with virtue ethics. People have sort of retread that territory. I'm a lot less familiar with those sorts of teleological accounts and the underlying metaphysics behind them and that sort of thing. So it's an area where when I discuss those, I don't have a sort of deep prepared knowledge of that territory where I can navigate it effectively. I have to sort of rely on my interlocutors, who are usually proponents of these views, explaining it to me, and then I react to it accordingly.
Okay. I get. And then the final thing is, in terms of free will, do you think, do you hold a compatibilist view?
A what view?
A compatibilist view.
I don't consider myself a compatibilist. I call myself a quietist on the question of free will. My issue with compatibilism is going to be, okay, well, free will is compatible with determinism. So even if determinism is true, we would still have free will. I'm still going to have the question, well, what is free will? And often the compatibilist accounts strike me as still containing various sorts of verbal mysteries and questionable normative or metaphysical claims. So if I'm supposed to think that free will is compatible with determinism such that we can hold people morally accountable, I'm going to have questions about what it means to say that we can or we're justified in holding people accountable, and what they mean by moral responsibility and moral accountability. So there's going to be other components of compatibilist accounts that I'm going to take issue with, aside from the, hey, we could have free will even if determinism is true. I agree with compatibilists that the question of determinism is probably not of substantial interest to much of what's at stake in the dispute, but I also don't agree that even if we set that issue aside, that you readily can get a substantive notion of free will.
I guess because they do have a different notion of free will, right?
Yeah, I don't have any notion at all. So what I would say is we should stop using the term and basically just taboo or excise the term from the philosophical discourse entirely, and then just speak directly about what sorts of capacities or abilities that we're talking about. So if compatibilists want to say, hey, we can socially construct a system of intersubjective agreement in which we hold one another mutually accountable under a specifiable set of conditions, that's fine. Of course, we can do that. But that's more a question of conceptual engineering and intentional construction than it is a matter of discovery. We're not like finding out that we have free will. We're opting to treat one another as having free will, in much the way that we opt to treat one another as having money. It's intersubjective. And I'm okay with that type of compatibilism, but I wouldn't want to call that free will any more than I would want to, say, okay, well, let's create a system of laws and then say it's anointed by God by mutual agreement. So I'm not gonna like the idea of drawing on the historical baggage of a notion like free will that has so much metaphysically behind it. I think that the notion of free will is rooted in, to put it bluntly, a Christian desire to punish people and make them feel guilty, and I don't see why a modern secular philosophical framework needs to retain residual vestiges of Christianity.
Maybe that's true, but I feel like then, well, people will often say like free will is an illusion, right? And so
Yeah.
it seems like even absence of like Christian faith, it seems like people have an intuition that the choices are determined by them.
Well, I think my choices are determined by me,
Well, in
but I don't know
accordance
why I would say,
to,
and therefore I have free will. Like, why add that part, you know?
well, I mean, I think more in accordance to like a bipart, like maybe like my mind is not just purely determined by environmental cause. I think people have a different intuition.
I don't know. So I don't think most people have the intuition that their actions aren't determined because I don't think most people think about determinism. I don't think most people are determinists. Like I don't think most people go around thinking determinism is true, but I also don't think they go around thinking it's not true. I think they just don't think about it at all.
Okay, then, like for example, if you ask a random person, do you think some of your actions were randomly occurred? Do you think most people like agree this to be true? And then in terms of, I guess, well, I don't know if you hold like a random outcome that was not predetermined is going to be, not determinism then.
Yeah, I think most people would say that their actions are not random, but I don't think that that entails that they think they have free will.
No, I'm saying like some particular actions, some people don't have explicit reasons to say why the action occurred. And I think people often will describe this as random.
Sorry, what are you asking me? I don't
So
think most people think their actions are random, but I'm not sure what you're asking me.
no, I'm saying most actions are going to have reason, but some people can't explain certain sets of reasons for particular actions. So often people describe this as random. So what I'm saying
Yeah, I do think people use random in that way. So people will use random to mean something like unexplained, and I really have no clue. But that's not a very good technical way of using the term random.
Yeah, sure, but that's what the point was, like whether it's tactical or not, is whether like these intuitions follow that people actually view all their actions to be predetermined.
Yeah. I don't think people have a view one way or the other. So I would endorse what I would say is folk free will indeterminacy. I just don't think people have views about whether they have free will or not.
Okay. Well, I guess those who think about determinism, like philosophers, obviously, do you think they? Well, I don't know what the overall consensus is. Like, is it
the majority of philosophers in the 2020 Phil paper survey endorsed compatibilism? I think it was a 56%, and then you're going to have a significant 17%, I think, endorsed libertarian free will, and then I want to say 14% endorsed. Let's see if I got the numbers right. I'm going to look it up right now. What did I say? I said 56, 17, and 14. I'm going to see if I'm accurate. I'm not going to be perfectly accurate. Free will. All right. Compatibilism, 59%. Yeah, I'm mostly on point. Okay, compatibilism, 59%, libertarianism, 19%, and no free will, 11%. And then you had 14% other.
Yeah, so those who do think about it seem to agree with the notion of free will. And even those of libertarian free will, that's still a large proportion. Why do you think that is?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, I do have to go because I said I was going to head out at 4 and I got to get ready for my next thing. So I guess that'll be the last question. So why do people endorse compatibilism and libertarianism? I think that a lot of philosophers grow up in a tradition in which part of the goal is to vindicate what they take to be common sense views about what the world is like. And so I think a big project of analytic philosophy is to say, hey, you know how you know what you think the world is like? You're right. And the only question then philosophers are focused on is saying why we're right all along. And so when libertarian accounts of free will started to seem a lot less plausible to philosophers as naturalism became more entrenched among analytic philosophers, philosophers still wanted to retain a sense that people are accountable for their actions. And so they turned to naturalist-friendly approaches like compatibilism to do so. And very few, I think, are willing to engage in what they would regard as biting the bullet and accepting the seemingly terrible implications of denying that we have free will. And I just don't think that there are terrible implications to denying that we have free will. And so I'm not motivated by that same project. I also just am not motivated by the broader project that analytic philosophers engage in, which is sort of justifying common sense thinking, or what they believe common sense thinking is.
Yeah, I think that's a good reason. But yeah, thanks for answering that question. But just like one thing, it's not a question, just a statement. Like I think, like I view that, I don't think it results in like anything catastrophic. I just view it as that those individuals are like broken cars. If they've committed like a bad action, we fix them by means of other things, environments to deter their actions. Right? That's how I.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I see it. I am going to have to go, so I appreciate you being up here. Thanks for the questions.
Problem.
All right. Alrighty. Everybody, I am going to have to end the live in a moment, so just final announcements while I do that. Thank you for coming up and talk to me about free will. All right, everybody. So I am going to be heading over to YouTube on my channel, which is also called Lance Independent. So if you just put Lance Independent into the search there, you will find it. So do consider going over there and joining me for that live. It'll be starting. I'll take a little break in between, so grab a drink, do all that stuff. Get my headphones, webcam, all that stuff set up. So thanks everybody for coming up and talking to me. If you did request and I didn't get to talk to you this time, it's something I'm going to make a habit of saying. I try to take my time with the people I talk to. I don't want to rush people just because I have other requests. So, when you get up to talk to me, I want to spend the same amount of, dedicate myself to having that conversation and allowing it to reach a natural end. Sometimes conversations can be awkward. Not everybody will, vibe with one another and be on the same wavelength. And sometimes you just got to push through that. You have to talk to people a few times. I've certainly had friends and people that became, acquaintances and friends where when we first talked, things might have been a little stilted or awkward. And then over time, we had more of a rapport. And then other people, you have kind of an immediate rapport. And that can come out in a conversation in ways that can come off as awkward. And I want to work past that and work through that. So that's another thing. Do go over and check out where I'm going to be reviewing a video on Peter Singer over on the other channel for Meta Monday. Someone put it in the chat, so I'm trying to be consistent about it. And I should say in a couple weeks, I am going to be gone for about 2 weeks. So I have to have a medical procedure where I'm not going to be able to talk. So it's not going to be a lot of fun. So I'm going to be missing for a little while, but I will be back after that. And I will keep doing lives. And while I'm at it, I will say I'm also going to start thinking about expanding the range of topics that I discuss. I think consciousness is a good one. And I'd really like to talk about some other topics like academia and I just mentioned consciousness, but maybe stuff in psychology. So, I'm a psychologist. I should talk about psychology. So there's other stuff to talk about. Alrighty. I am out of here. All right. And also, and the other thing I wanted to say for people that were giving me gifts, I thank you a ton. I really appreciate it. Often, I don't know what the norms on TikTok are. If I should stop a conversation to say thanks in the middle of it, I'm happy to do that. So do let me know if that's what you're supposed to do. Oh, thank you. See, I see someone's sending me roses now. Thank you, Julie X. Appreciate it. But I don't like to break the flow of conversations in the middle of them. So I don't know if people just like to give their gifts and they're cool with that. Or if they are seeking that recognition, and because I totally understand it, if you're spending money. Thank you. See, I got Mob and McLovin. Thank you, appreciate it. I'll talk to people about what the norms are about that. But especially I don't want to if a guest is talking and I get a gift, I don't want to interrupt them. I have seen people do it and people seem okay with it. So I'm not saying it's rude if people do. I just don't know, and I am very slow to learn. It's kind of wild that I'm even on here, but I am now going to make myself late for the other thing. So, all right. Take care, everybody. Appreciate it. Someone says, I want all the recognition. All right. Just Jim, all the recognition. Someone says, I think you should probably keep on talking. No, I'm not going to keep on talking. I am out of here. I'm going to go to my live over on YouTube. Go check that out. See y'all later.